Hi, I'm Ian, human changemaker and founder of Daylight Consulting, the sapient change engine and humanity's first Clarke tech. This show, Daytime, is for the changemakers, and today we're discussing the issue with labels. Let's get real. Now consider for a moment all the different labels that you ascribe to yourself. Labels are subdivisions of humanity that relate to mostly our extrinsic characteristics, our features, things like our race, ethnicity, age, sexuality, gender, and they can be, but they can also be less absolute things. They can be positive labels, such as someone is inspiring, or intelligent, or curious, or authentic, and then there can be negative labels like someone is ugly, or someone is a waste of space, or someone is a faggot, or or an N-bomb, or whatever we want to whatever colourful magic we want to go with today. So they can be used both to attack and to construct the individual identities of people and communities and cultures. If I was going to reel off mine, I guess the visible ones I'm a male, as in I'm cis male. I was born as a man, and I identify rather mundanely still as a man. I'm queer, so I don't ascribe to a heteronormative mentality about desire, and neither am I homophobic nor heterophobic. I'm also 37 years old, so I've been on this planet for 37 years, and and what else? Oh, I'm racially non-binary, so I'm 50% Black Caribbean and 50% white English in my case. I like non-binary because it aligns to the other nomenclature that we use for other characteristics. So that's probably my labels. I'm also a scientist. I'm not allowed to call myself a psychologist because that space has been colonized by people who have absolutely no idea whatsoever about human identity. So I like scientist because it's nice and general. But the most general label you will ever be able to come up with is human being. Because you have immediately 8 billion friends. I don't understand why people are so insistent on forgetting this label, because it is the most powerful label in the world, and being a human being allows you to do anything you wish to whatever ability that you can achieve. One of the many outcomes of George Floyd's murder at the hands of those who tasks with protecting him in 2020 was the government commission's report. I've got to remember the name. The Inclusive Britain, the Commission for Race and Ethnic Disparities report, commissioned in the wake of George Floyd's murder, to assess whether the institutions and government of the UK were institutionally racist against non-white people. And fortunately for us all, the government concluded in its own report that it was not. So that's a relief, isn't it? Great, very authentic. One of the only minuscule elements of truth within this report was that the acronym BAME was unsafe. Now, if you're not familiar with it, BAME is Black and other marginalised and other minority ethnicities, not even marginalised. Essentially everyone that isn't white. Now, the issue with that is that in a world with 8 billion people, just 8% of the human race are in fact white. So what that tells us is that the fact of minority or majority has absolutely no bearing on privilege whatsoever. So the words minority and majority are meaningless. But it goes further than that. Actually, every single label is meaningless if you think about it, because as the Human Genome Project proved in 2003, there is no difference intrinsically between black people or white people, or men and women, or older people or younger people, or gay people or straight people. Everyone, all of us, are broadly identical intrinsically, in a sense that we have no net advantage or disadvantage, and yet we are infinitely intrinsically unique from each other. So the world works in mysterious ways. So I often hate using acronyms, and I very rarely, if ever, use them or labels, because I don't see them as authentic. I put up on the screen here all of the different acronyms that I am aware of for non-white people. And there are many. I believe there's at least 6 or 7 that are in mainstream use across various parts of the world. And the question is always, what should we call these people? What about people? Why don't we try that? Yeah, there's no two ways of looking at it. Human beings are human beings. But the real question that very few people agree with me on that one. But how about this one then? Can you think of a single label for white people? Oh, go all day. No, why? We don't give labels to things that we care about. That is the ultimately the situation, unfortunately. And therefore, wherever you see an acronym, you see a lack of authenticity, and you see someone indicating an aspect of humanity that they dislike or are not accepting of. The best way to give an example of this is, and I think I did use this in social construction, is that if Mary has a wonky nose and she's a woman, then she is then attacked in the street for being a woman with a wonky nose, you bitch. And instead of understanding that the person attacking her is suffering from hatred, and therefore any attack against her is wholly indiscriminate, and therefore not a reflection on whatsoever on her character. And then she moves on and lives a happy and healthy life with fulfilling knowledge that she is a lovely human being and she needs not fear anyone. There is nothing to fear but fear itself. She will be fine. But instead, Mary with a wonky nose, who's a woman, takes deep offence to it because she's insecure about her identity, and she feels attacked on those characteristics that make her that she identifies with. Mary is staunchly feminist, and she also is a member of the Wonky Nose Club of Woolwich, and therefore, in fact, she's a chair. So because she set it up after this attack, and so she sits there in the Wonky Nose Club for Women of Woolwich, and she's the only person there because she has segregated herself. She's created a barrier, a border, which we discussed in borders, around her identity. And she has reduced significantly now her power as a human being by no longer identifying as a human, but by identifying as a wonky-nosed woman from Woolwich. And if you extrapolate that out to what's happening around the world, you start to understand how human identity, which today isn't defined, which is bizarre because we're all human, but by creating all these different social constructs around sexuality, age, gender, ethnicity, these things that are totally meaningless in terms of genetics, they've never been observed as having any bearing whatsoever on our character or personality or ability or potential for success. They are entirely meaningless. Let's take ethnicity, for example. Now, a common understanding of how ethnicity works, ethnicity is sort of our skin colour or our race. There's a little bit of a difference. So race is primarily about skin colour. So mine is this lovely silky brown. Caramel, can I do that? It's just a light, I promise. The face is falling off otherwise. Then you also have white skin colours, black skin colours, Asian skin colours. You actually have, if you line them all up, I'll probably put them on the screen as well, you actually see, if you look at human skin colours, this is a spectrum. This is not a label situation, CIPD, with 17 ethnicities now recommended best practice. Get it in your head. This is spectrum. Human identity is spectral. So we therefore cannot put people in boxes. The next thing to understand about skin colour is that it is entirely environmental. It is a product of the melanin-producing pigmentation cells in the skin of every single human being on Earth that responds over time to the level of UV radiation exposure that we receive. And if you imagine the Earth is curved like this, and parts of it are facing directly towards the sun, where they get the perpendicular UV radiation from the sun, and other parts of it, such as the northern and southern hemisphere, are angled slightly away, so we don't have such constant exposure to the sunlight to warrant additional protection. So over time, those near the equator, their skin pigmentation cells start to produce more melanin, and that will then naturally over time make their skin darker. It is a pure response to the environment and has absolutely no basis whatsoever on our genetic makeup. If you used to take a bit of my hair, none's come out today, that's nice, and put it into an analyzer, it would not, the scientists analysing my DNA would not be able to tell from my DNA what colour my skin is. Absolutely not. They might be able to tell that I have some sub-Saharan African heritage in me, or that I have some Icelandic or Viking heritage in me from being British. But here's the thing, every single human being is effectively an immigrant, particularly people in the UK and America, given the nature of our cultural history. None of those countries were or the people, the dominant species within these countries, are actually the original population. We've displaced by the Romans in the UK, in the UK's case, and in America displaced by colonialists. So a common construct around race is that the genetics of human beings are broadly scrunched into different continents, and black people are African and Jamaican, and white people are American and British and European. And we used to think that there was very little variation within those gene pools, those continentally clustered gene pools, and there was lots of variation between different continents. So a big argument of white supremacists is that if we kill all the black people, then we will be able to retain the things that make us the best genetic superior race in the world. Eugenics Wars, effectively. But that doesn't play out, unfortunately. That's not being real. You see, the thing about the Human Genome Project found that it was the opposite was true. See, 99.9% of human DNA is shared between the entire human race. And there is very little genetic variation between different continents and different clusters of race, but lots of genetic variation within different clusters of race. So all these white supremacists have a huge amount of variation in their genetics between them, but very little that separates them from black people in Africa. In fact, only 1% of human beings have any DNA sequencing whatsoever that is specific to their region on Earth. So a much better way of accounting for genetic differences is to talk about ethnicities instead of race, because skin colour is meaningless. And it filters out within just a couple of generations, and it normalises to the local environment. So if we talk about, say, sub-Saharan Africa, or continental Eurasia, or the Americas, you start to then get a little bit closer to something meaningful, which is, okay, where is my genetic heritage from, my immediate family line? Where can I trace the DNA back from that to? Now, it doesn't tell you anything about you won't have any genes there that are going to give you something better or worse than someone else might do in the world, but it helps you at least trace back your lineage, which for some people is quite important. So it's really important to understand when you're talking about labels what you are trying to achieve from that label. And really, the best thing about labels, in my opinion, is that if you assess the inclusiveness of an organisation or a community towards specific subdivisions of humanity, you are then able to assess whether there is a functional meritocracy within that firm or community where all types of people can thrive, including peoples with different intrinsic uniqueness as well as extrinsic meaningless arbitrary labels as well. So I do see utility in labels, and I use them a lot when I'm conducting data analyses to ensure that a firm or a community is telling the truth. But it's beyond that, there is very little that you can ever ascertain on someone's personality based off of their labels. This is entirely meaningless. Our behaviour is not the product of any label whatsoever. Our behaviour is the product of being human beings.
Mr. Richard Noddy, CEO of Goldman Sachs UK, can you explain to us why, in a country with a 14.9% national pay gap and in an industry, financial services, with a 32.1% gender pay gap, Goldman Sachs currently has a 51.3% gender pay gap, the largest of any financial firm in the UK?
Well, my dear queer black friend, I assure you that while progress may at times seem slow, our diversity and inclusion agenda remains front and centre.
But what you're saying is entirely deceptive. The numbers speak for themselves. Why would you be so blatantly dishonest with us?